You've touched on the weight gain piece a few times there, but let's take that even further and talk about spiking blood glucose, raising insulin, and then driving this extra energy into fat cells and causing all kinds of issues that way.
Yeah, so when you tell people at conferences, there are a few things that you say at a conference, and you're always looking for the audience reaction. And one of the ones that gets a sort of sit up, if not a bit of a gasp, is when you tell people you've got 1 teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream at any one time, 4 grams of glucose in the entire bloodstream, in 5 liters of blood or whatever. And they look really sort of quite taken aback. And then the body has got this incredible mechanism. You've got the pancreas releasing insulin to take glucose out of the bloodstream and glucagon to put glucose back into the bloodstream. So you've got this incredible mechanism until we abuse it that is keeping that blood glucose level at that sort of 4 grams per the entire body. So then you say to people, okay, so you have an apple. Now, an apple is partly glucose, partly fructose, slightly more fructose. Keep the maths simple again 20 grams of apple, 20 or 20 grams of carbohydrate in a moderate apple. About 10 grams are going to be glucose, 10 grams are going to be fructose. So the fructose is going to go to the liver. Hello, non alcoholic fatty liver disease. And the glucose is going to go into the bloodstream. And that's 10 grams of glucose that's gone into the bloodstream. So when you point that out to people, you think snacking on an apple is super healthy. You just put into the bloodstream 2.5 times the glucose that it wants in the entire bloodstream. And actually, it was quite happy. It was in balance. You might have felt like a snack, but it was in balance. It was quite happy. It's now got to get those 10 grams of glucose out of the bloodstream. And when you're a child or you're a younger person or you don't abuse your body with carbohydrates, the body will do that. It will do that quite effectively. But I think type 2 diabetes is the body saying, look, enough is enough. You ask me to take glucose out of breakfast, then you give me a snack in the middle of the morning, then you have another, low calorie, low fat, high carb lunch, then you do it again in the afternoon, then you do it again at dinner, then you do it again in the evening. And you've been doing that for years now, and I'm done. I'm out. I just can't keep getting that 4 grams back where it needs to be. And then if it doesn't keep it level, then you might dip down below the 4 grams. And that's when you do start craving food. I mean, this is one of the first things that I wrote about. My first book actually came out 20 years ago this year. And it was one of the conditions that I wrote about then that drive cravings. If you ever get to the point that your body doesn't keep that sort of stable 4 grams of glucose, you will get what people now describe as hangry, hunger and anger, irritability. The body will drive you to get some glucose back in. But of course, you need 1 gram, maybe. Maybe you've dipped down to about three something, you need 1 gram. And of course, people go and have a rice cake or an apple and they're back shooting in another 10 grams that they didn't need. So, this whole carbohydrate intake thing is absolutely catastrophic for one of our most delicate mechanisms in the body.
And it's going to lead to weight gain and also fat blocking for people that want to start burning body fat. Every time they have carbs and spike the glucose, insulin follows. And then that puts us into a fat storage mode. And for most people these days, they want to lose the fat. So they're going to continuously, by snacking on these carbs throughout the day, block that fat burning system.
Yep, 100%. And I was at a conference last week and I'd done my talk, and it was to quite often, these are the best talks to do actually, because I quite often talk at low carb conferences or talk at medic conferences or something like that. And you've got a lot of people in the audience who think they know something about nutrition, and they can be the most challenging audiences. So this was actually talking to 150 of the most senior police in the southwest of England. So they didn't know too much about nutrition. So they were just like sponges, like, wow, this is fascinating. Never really thought about food in that way. They were loving it. And so my talk was last. So it was just before we were going to have some free time before dinner. And somebody came up to me and said, so should I not be joining Slimming World then? And I said, okay, do you want to know how to lose weight in 10 minutes? And of course she said, yeah. And then a few others sort of gathered around and said, yeah, I want to hear it too. So I sort of grabbed a flip chart. And you go through the sort of, this is what you currently think. You think it's about energy in, energy out. What happens the minute you try to eat less? So they say, oh, you get hungry and you want to eat more. Right. Okay. And then are you able to do more? No, because you're too hungry because you didn't eat enough. Great. So you've got why calorie counting is really not a good idea. Do you understand physiologically the state that you need to be in to lose weight? Do you actually understand what weight loss is, because it isn't just a calorie deficit. And they kind of look at you like, no, I've never thought about that. So you say, okay, so what is body fat? Triglyceride, trimeanin 3, you've got a glycerol backbone, you've got three fats essentially, and it can't get through the cell membrane. So it actually gets packaged with the help of insulin in the cell in that form, sort of on the other side. So the fat has got to get in there, and the glucose has got to get in there. And of course, insulin does a marvelous job at doing that. So then you say to them, okay, if you want to lose weight, you want that fat out of the storage system. You want to start using that for energy, whether it's the glycerol backbone or the triglycerides or whatever. You want to use that for energy. Do you know what state you need to be in to be able to use that for energy? Forget calories. And they all kind of look at you like, no idea, not even thought about that. It's like, okay, so if your body can see any carbohydrate present, any stored carbohydrate, which is glycogen, they know that word because they do exercise, it's not going to call on fat. It's not going to call on any fat. It's not going to call on dietary fat or body fat because you've got another fuel source present. So the first thing you have to do is to not have that fuel present. And you explain to them about your glycogen storeroom, how much you've got to cut that back so that you're not filling it up to its capacity of about 1,400 calories per day. So, like, guys, you've got to whack your carbohydrate down as low as you can go and then halve it again and just keep going until you really can sustain it at, quite a reasonable level. Then your body is going to look for the next fuel source to fuel on, which is going to be fat. You're going to force it to do that. If you've just gone and eaten butter because you think that's how to do a keto diet, you're going to be fueling on your butter that you've just eaten. If you actually want to fuel on body fat, you've got to not have carbohydrate present and also don't start doing stupid things like adding fat to food. Just eat normally, massively cut your carbohydrate intake, and then probably at about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, the body is going to lose weight because it's going to need to tap into an alternative fuel source. But for as long as you're eating carbohydrates all day long, it is physiologically impossible, no matter how many calories you eat, for you to lose weight. If you're over what your body needs in terms of fuel, which might be a paltry 800 calories a day, it might be that low, eat them all in the form of carbohydrate, and you probably still ate more than you needed in the form of carbohydrate. And they got it so fast. It was unbelievable.
Let's get into specifics there. You mentioned 800 calories. Is that carbohydrates per day they would have to bring it down to, or what was
Well,
that
it's
number?
just so if you go back to that woman on the 2,000 calories, as I say, I don't know exactly how much carbohydrate can be used for the basal metabolic rate. It's something I've had on my research list for ages. It's really not easy to find out. And if anyone's listening to this and they've got an idea, please get in touch. As a basic principle, it is largely fueled by fat and protein because it is building bone density, fighting infection, cell repair, and that stuff needs fat and protein. Now, if you're lying ill in bed all day and that's your basal metabolic rate requirement, you will also be keeping your body warm. And carbohydrates can provide energy, so they can keep the body warm. So there is an element of that 1,500. Now, even if I go really generous and say, right, let's assume of the 1,500 calories based on metabolic rate, 500 of those could be met by carbohydrate. That's probably quite high. There's still 1,000 that you need in the form of fat and protein. So if somebody goes on one of those stupid low calorie milkshake diet drink kind of things, the Cambridge diet or whatever, they are largely carbohydrate because they can't have more than about 15% protein by law. They don't want to put fat in because it puts the calories up. So they are largely carbohydrate, and they're actually also largely sucrose, which is quite amusing. You're eating more than you probably needed for energy, which is back to that sort of 500 calories a day. So you really can get to quite a low calorie level. But if you're eating the wrong calories, you can still be gaining weight, but actually you'll also be getting sick at the same time because you're not eating the things that the body needs to repair itself and to build for the future.
For somebody that wants to get into that fat burning mode, in grams of carbs per day, how low would they bring that in a obviously a range?
I don't know. I'm not a counter. I'm not an advocate for counter. So your very first question, sort of, what is the one thing, the big first thing that people can do wrong? And I said, not eating real food. And another one, I could easily have given the answer. Counting anything, having this bad relationship with food. I'm really not a fan of macros and wearing monitors and monitoring everything on a minute by minute basis. I don't think it's healthy. It gets really obsessive. It's not the relationship with food that I think is going to be healthy or helpful. So I would say don't do any of that. I mean, first thing, if you're following anywhere close to the US dietary guidelines or the UK dietary guidelines, you're going to be having around, I don't know, 350 for a female, 400 grams for a male of carbohydrate a day, which is obscene. So the first thing I would say is cut out all your starchy carbohydrates. So I mean, yeah, cut out all processed food. That's number one. That's a no-brainer. All processed food, just stop eating it. Cakes, biscuits, ice creams, donuts, cookies, just stop it. It's disgusting. You're better than that. Don't do that to yourself. Then cut out your beige stuff. So you don't need rice, you don't need pasta, you don't need bread, you don't need potatoes. When you look at your plate and you've got meat or fish, eggs or dairy, which is your fat protein, and you've got some vegetables and salad if you like those, and if you're fine with those, I happen to like veg and salad quite a lot. I think it makes the plate look a bit nicer. The starchy stuff is then not bringing anything to the table. So if somebody said, if I've got a steak and a super salad on my plate, and somebody said, do you want some potatoes or some brown rice? It's like, well, A, there's no room because I'm going to have a big portion of the meat. But B, why would I have that? What's it bringing to the table? It's bringing nothing nutritionally that I haven't already got on my plate. It's going to mess up my blood glucose level. In my diet principles that I said I first developed about 20 years ago, I developed this principle, which is really powerful in weight loss, just this alone, of realizing how nature provides food. So, nature, again, this was a bit of a penny drop moment. They don't teach you this in school. Nature provides carb proteins in everything other than sucrose and oil. So, nature provides carb proteins, which are the things that vegans would eat. So, that's your whole grains, legumes, beans, pulses, vegetables, salads. They've got protein and they've got carbohydrate. They got a trace of fat, but that's a separate issue. And then nature provides predominantly fat proteins, which is the things that vegans don't eat. And that's your meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. When you realize that, you start thinking about what the fake food manufacturers do, because nature provides them separately. The minute the fake food manufacturers provide them together, we can't stop eating them. So think about all of that fake food. It's a combination, everything's got protein in it. It's a combination of fat and carbohydrate. So your ice cream, your cookies, your donuts, your cakes, all of it, crisps, chips, whatever you guys call them, all are a mix of fat and carbohydrate. And the body likes it wants more of it can't stop eating it. Now, the only comparable thing in real food that nature provides are nuts and seeds. And they've got good measures of fat, carbohydrate, and protein. I've never really known anyone overeat seeds. I mean, you might be able to. Nuts, definitely. I mean, stand somebody next to nuts at a party, and before they've realized they've just eaten the whole bowl, particularly if they're salted, that's another taste addition that you can put into the mix to make them irresistible and moreish, as I call them. But that's the only thing that's provided in nature. So I say to people who are trying to lose weight, nuts are not going to be your friends. So skip nuts because they're that fat carb combo. And then base your meals on the carb proteins or base your meals on the fat proteins, but don't mix. And there are several reasons for that. One is you'll just be able to eat way more. So if I say to you, right, you can have dry bread or dry oat cakes, or you can have cheese separately, you've got a limit on both of those options. The minute I say to you, you can have bread and cheese, you can have oat biscuits and cheese, or butter and oat biscuit, you've got no limit. You're back into that fat carb combo. So first of all, it will limit what you eat. The secondly, it was what you raised earlier, which is the whole insulin fat storing ability. So if you had, for example, steak and potatoes, the body would want to use the carbohydrate for fuel and it would want to store the fat for later on. And it can store the fat for later on because you ate carbohydrate, so you've got insulin present, so you've got the perfect fat storing environment. So if you didn't eat fat at that meal, if you had a baked potato with no butter or no cheese and maybe a veggie chili, so you've gone for that carb protein combination, you're just giving the body a lot of carbohydrate. And yes, the body's got to use it up. But if that's, say, your only carb meal for the day and your other two meals are fat protein meals, then you're starting to restrict your carbohydrate. But processed food go, starchy foods go. And then I don't think many people need to be more restrictive than that. It depends how metabolically, what's the word I could compromise you are, metabolically unhealthy. If you can catch somebody young enough and just say to them, right, don't have all of those, but you can still have fluid dairy. Don't worry about putting grated carrot on your super salad, or don't worry about your starchy vegetables as long as it's not potatoes. Enjoy berries if you're going to have yogurt with it and all that kind of thing. You'll probably be getting up to around 100 grams of carbohydrate a day, maybe towards that sort of moderate level, as Professor Tim Noakes would call it, around 130 grams of carbohydrate. Anywhere south of that, you're going to start doing pretty well. And then if you're not shifting the weight, or if you're finding that's creating cravings, perhaps because you are a little bit metabolically unhealthy, then cut back. Then maybe have a look at what you're eating on a daily basis, because we eat the same things most days, and say, okay, what could I cut out quite easily? Let's say I have an orange for breakfast or something, or I have a piece of fruit late afternoon because dinner's going to be late. Let's say that's the person's diary. Right, cut that out. That's 20 grams of carbohydrate gone straight away. You can still have your latte, your cappuccino, your Greek yogurt, your berries, your super salad. You're not going to feel deprived, but just cut out the big ticket items until you get to the point where you're not craving, you're feeling good, you've got energy all day long, and your weight is heading to where you want it to be.
For somebody who's going to start to adopt what we're talking about here, cutting back on carbs, say they're in that range you talked about earlier, 400 grams per day. How do you recommend they do this? Because, like anything in life, there's ripping off the band aid or doing it slowly to allow their metabolism to adjust and to form new habits. Do you find it's better for somebody to do this more slowly over time?
There's debate on this, isn't there? I mean, the work that is it Philip Prinz has been doing with Prof Notes, Jeff Volek, Steve Finney. They've been looking in athletes, which is obviously a different person to a metabolically challenged person, but they've been looking at athletes as if they're carb fueling currently, how quickly then can they switch to fat fueling, and do they lose performance in the interim? And certainly the most recent work from Philip Prinz has been extraordinary, and they're not losing performance even in that short period of time. Now, in my experience, working more with metabolically challenged people and people who've got quite a lot of weight to lose, they do go through a period when the body's lazy. It's used to fueling on carbohydrates. It's been getting more than enough carbohydrate all day long to fuel the requirements. What they tend to do as well is, because they're in this sort of hyperglycemic highs and lows, because the body isn't keeping that 4 grams of glucose. I mean, how can it when you're chucking in 400 grams of carbohydrate on a daily basis? How can it even do that? So they are finding that they're lurching from a high to a low. They get a bit tired. They grab some M&Ms or something, and then they have a sugar crash, and then they grab some more. So they're just in this roller coaster all day long. So it would be what I just said, which is number one, ditch the processed food. That's just got to go, and that's not gently, slowly. Just get rid of it. Just stop it. Yes, it's going to hurt. Yes, you're going to have food cravings, which is why I address sort of why we have food cravings in a lot of the writings that I've done. But you've just got to say it's going. I'm not having processed food anymore. Then, as I say, cut out the starches. So start getting more down to that figure. Some people do go pretty brutal. It's almost as if they're going to say, right, I'm just going to force the body to fuel in a different way, and they will hear about keto or see a presentation or go to a conference or something, and they just think, oh, I'm just going to try it. And they do tend to go through, some people call it keto flu, people call it sort of keto tiredness. The body is going to rebel. I mean, the body's going to say, well, I used to get M&Ms every time I was feeling a bit low in energy. You just went and, replenished the sugar, literally the sucrose. What's going on now? But it doesn't take too long. I really don't think. I mean, is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? In the course of the rest of your life, it's not a long period of time. And yes, this does need to be for the rest of your life, which is why, I don't want people counting things thinking, oh, I'm going to be carnivore for the rest of my life. I'm never going to be able to eat a crunchy salad ever again. I'm not going to be able to have a latte, go out for coffee with my friends, all that. I don't want people to feel deprived in that way. Everyone is going to have something that works for them. And it doesn't mean we've all got to be Sean Baker or whatever. That works for Sean Baker. It doesn't work for everyone else. So just I'd say head in that right direction and keep evaluating how you feel. If you want to take the plunge and jump in right at the deep end, then yeah, go 50 grams of carbohydrate if you want. Don't do it when you've got an important event coming up, accept that you're going to feel rubbish for a period of time, but it's going to force the body into fueling in a different way. And having my husband and I went through this, many, many, many years ago. And I can remember on a walk, he would sometimes feel quite sort of lightheaded in the early days. It's like, whoa, okay, body was looking for glucose then. And it would be seconds. He'd just stand and pause. And it's almost as if the body says, right, break something down, chuck it back into the bloodstream, and then he's off again. It's seamless. But it will feel different, particularly if you've never done it. I mean, a lot of people have tried an Atkins and then given up or something. But if you've never even tried to go low in carbohydrate, you're going to shock the body. But I don't think that's a bad thing. You just need to power through it.
For somebody who is making that transition, how do you feel about bringing, say, exogenous ketones, MCT oil, electrolytes, different supplements, and adjuncts into the diet to support that transition and beyond?
I've never done it. I've never looked at it. I've never reviewed the evidence. So I can't comment on, is it helpful? Is it efficacious? I just don't know. I mean, obviously, the ideal, if you want to get into the state of ketosis, and I test every now and again out of curiosity, mostly. There's a particular friend who's always testing herself. She's fascinated by it. So if I ever go up and see her, she'll always test me just before dinner. And she's like, oh, I can't believe it. You're always in ketosis. And I actually eat quite a lot of carbohydrate. She'll say, what have you had today? And I say, oh, I don't know, chocolate mousse, Greek yogurt, berries. I had a chocolate on the way up because I found one in the car. You know, what I mean, and like, sure, you're still in ketosis. So you can be, and I do know there've been times in my life when the Tim Noakes trial, for example. I do remember it was just so stressful. I mean, anything you were eating was just getting burned off immediately. My appetite was not there because I didn't know when I was going to get called to the stand. So you just sort of had butterflies in your tummy the whole time. And I know then I was in ketosis for quite a few days. And it's quite interesting. And you realize what your friends are saying who kind of live in that state all the time. They say you just feel you're fueling on rocket fuel. You don't feel hungry. You really can go hours without eating. You just don't feel hungry. It is quite a nice state to be in. And then you say, well, why are you not in that all the time? Because I enjoy having a latte with my friends. I enjoy dinner parties. If I go out for dinner with someone, they know how we eat largely, but whatever they put in front of me, I'm going to eat. I'm not gonna be rude and say, "Oh, you've given me cauliflower rice here. I'm not sure I even want 10 grams of carbohydrate." Just enjoy it. Not I'm not that fussy about food at all.
Hearing you talk there, it sounds like you're not concerned, definitely for yourself, about being in ketosis, but for people you're working with or people listening today, do you feel getting into that metabolic state periodically has certain advantages and is something we should aim for?
Oh, yeah. And that's me, I've got to put it in the caveat of I'm almost certainly in ketosis at some point every day. But because I'm not losing weight, my weight has been stable for absolutely ages. I mean, 20 plus years. Clearly there's times when I'm using body fat for fuel, and then there's times when I'm storing again. And I actually think that's pretty healthy. I think if you've got my husband's an engineer and he always says if you've got a mechanism that works both ways, it's probably useful to use it both ways. It's designed to work both ways. We are designed to be able to store fat and unstore fat. And the dietary guidelines just put us in permanent store fat mode. And then you've got people who are sort of fasting, who I guess are trying to get into a sort of permanent unstore mode. And that's fine if you're 300 pounds, but it's not fine if you're 107 pounds or whatever I am. We talk in stone and whatever over here. So, but no, I do think it's a good state to be in. And I think if you get your carbohydrate down to the kind of level that you need to be healthy, to avoid type 2 diabetes, to avoid non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, to make sure that you've got enough room for fat and protein in your diet and the most nutritious foods, if you're doing all of those right things, at some point in the day, you are naturally going to be in ketosis. Um, and if you've got a lot of weight to lose and you get into that state, it really can help you because you really genuinely will find I'm not physically hungry. You then might still have all the psychological reasons for eating because a lot of people didn't get to 300 pounds because they were eating the way that the government told them to eat. You know, they got caught up in the whole carbohydrate is addictive. You want the same thing, you want more of it. If you get to the point you start to feel bad if you don't have it. And that's food addiction. You're then into that kind of state. So there might be all of those kind of things still going on, and you've got to address those separately. But you will actually be able to take away your physical food cravings, which a lot of people at the moment would struggle to believe that they could do that. But you can do that. You don't need a Zempic to do that. You can do that through turbo fueling.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
There are no essential carbohydrates whatsoever. None. Zilch, zippo. Telling people to have at least 55% of their diet in the form of the one macronutrient that we don't even need is the starting point that's wrong. You think snacking on an apple is super